Candace Bushnell, please welcome! Mila Semeshkina.
What's going on, guys? Stand up.
This music, it was the ringtone of 10 years of my life. Candace,
Yes.
you are a journalist, best-selling author, a legend, and creator of the iconic heroines Carrie, Samantha, Charlotte, and Miranda. You know those ladies?
Yes.
My favorite one was Samantha. Of course, Samantha. It was my role models for many, many years. Through their stories, you didn't just change how we see women's life, you redefined what success and independence mean. You showed that women can be stylish, ambitious, and fully in charge of their own careers, money, and choices. Even 25 years later, your work still resonates, right?
That's right.
Right?
Yes.
Everything started with your column in the New York Observer. What was the starting point, the spark that made you write about the lives of independent women in New York?
Well, actually, the New York Observer was not the starting point because I started writing professionally when I was 19. And the reason, when I was 8 years old, I had an epiphany. And I was reading a book and I was in school and I looked up and I just knew that I was going to be a writer. And so that was something that I really focused on and pursued my whole life. It was really my reason for being. So I started writing professionally when I was 19, and I was always struck by the women in New York who I thought were so interesting and very different from the women that I knew when I was growing up. And also, when I was growing up in the 1960s, and it was a very sexist time. And women, back then, women could only have 4 jobs: nurse, teacher, secretary, or librarian. But also, it wasn't just that. It was also the way you were supposed to think as a woman. And even as a little girl, I realized I don't think that way. And I really wanted to do something to show women a different way to think and a different way to look at their lives. So that was really the beginning.
And you changed a lot in our minds, a lot. So your mission is completed or almost completed. So because we need to do our homework, right, ladies? How did your childhood shape you? What values or perspectives from then have you carried through the years and reflected in your columns?
Well, when I was a little girl, my father was considered a genius because he invented the fuel cell that they used in the first Apollo space rockets. And for some reason, thank you, he decided that I too had to do something really important. And I remember him telling me, you have to change the world and you have to make a major contribution. And as a little girl, I was like, how am I going to do that? I don't even know how to go about beginning to do that. And when I was little, I thought, well, maybe I can win the Pulitzer Prize and that will show everybody. So it was really about thinking independently and, thinking freely, I would say, in a way. not being afraid to be different. So those are the things that I would say have carried through, even to now. So, and even as a little girl, I knew that I didn't want to have that kind of suburban life. I didn't want to be married and have kids. So, and I feel like
that's okay.
I was, most of the little girls that I knew wanted those things, but I didn't. So I felt like I was a bit of an outlier.
I want to share with all of you my personal story. As a girl who started dreaming about successful career, I was first watched Sex and the City when I was 13. I didn't speak English those time. And for years after that, I didn't miss a single episode. So I watched Sex and the City, I don't know how many times. I used to sit by the TV at 11 p.m. in a tiny village somewhere deep in Russia, dreaming that one day I'd have an office in Manhattan, like Samantha Jones, and that I'd buy myself a red Birkin bag. Today I have several large offices, one of them in Miami, because between Miami and New York, I chose Miami, and others in Dubai and in a few major cities around the world. I also have a serious Birkin collection and have worked in marketing in PR for over 10 years. Can you imagine how many girls and women around the world share a story like mine? Do you truly realize the impact you've had on how women everywhere in the globe think and dream?
For me, that is the most rewarding part of Sex and the City. And I've had so many women come up to me. I mean, actually, even from the beginning when the book first came out. But I've had so many women come up to me, like all over the world, and say that Sex and the City gave them a different way to think about their lives, and a different way to think about relationships and who they could be in the world. And to me, that's the most rewarding and the most satisfying part of Sex and the City, is that it's given so many women a different way to think about their lives. And I feel like that's really what I set out to do so many years ago. So it's really amazing, and I'm so grateful that it happened.
We're grateful it happened too. When you created the characters Carrie, Samantha, Charlotte, and Miranda, did you imagine that their stories would become a cultural phenomenon?
I didn't. And what's very interesting to me is that I was really writing about those women characters for years before Sex and the City. And, I had a friend, she knew everything about men. And I would always go and ask her questions about men. She was like an expert on men. And so in the 1980s, she had a couple of different names. I think she was like Jennifer and Susan. And then when I did Sex and the City, she became Samantha. So I was actually writing about many of these same women for years, but with Sex and the City, I changed their names. So then in Sex and the City, they were Charlotte, Miranda, and Samantha.
Your work has become a symbol of female friendship. Why was it so important for you to make friendship rather than romantic relationship the central theme? Because there are not so much romance in Sex and the City, but friendship is quite a lot there.
Well, the reality is that number one, when I was a little girl, I had lots and lots of little girlfriends, and I always thought that women were so interesting. I actually thought that they were more interesting than men. And then when I got to New York City, the reality is that there are more women than men in New York City. So New York City is a place where those female friendships are so important because you can't really retreat to being married and having kids. And I knew so many women in New York who were ambitious and, they were not necessarily finding men. And so, these female friendships really became your family. And, the other part of it is that I've always been very suspicious of the heterosexual relationships. I've always felt that they're not what everybody says that they are. So that's one of the reasons to focus on women and maybe not romance.
What lessons about careers and financial independence demonstrated through your characters remain relevant today?
Well, I think probably the most important aspects are being independent and making your own money and having something of yourself. Always having some part of yourself that you can rely on. And I think that that's even more true today in a time when I do see a lot of women questioning heterosexual relationships in ways that they never did before. I see a lot of things on social media where, in the past, everybody felt like, a heterosexual relationship, finding a man was the end all be all. And now I see a lot of women questioning that. So, and I do think that, in the last 20 or 30 years, women have become much more independent. They've become more educated. They're really kind of taking over the world and actually doing better at a lot of the financial things than men are.
I can agree with you, yeah. Everyone perceives books in their own way. Personally, I see Sex and the City not just a novel about love and friendship. For me, Sex and the City is a story about New York and about loneliness. What is the novel about for you?
Well, for me, Sex and the City is about money, power, status, and how that affects relationships. And I've always felt that I'm really like a cultural anthropologist. And I am, examining in a lot of ways the human condition, but the way that it really is, which is something that some people don't like because they don't want to see the truth. They really want a fantasy of what life is. And I've always been somebody who I really like to examine the truth of it, but in a funny, humorous way. So I would say the thing that is really the thread in all of my work is that it's actually funny. And that's the part that really carried over into Sex and the City, the TV show, is that it's really very funny and humorous.
There is a growing trend of loneliness and staying single. If more people start living alone, how might that impact society and future generations? How do you think?
Well, first of all, I think that we're already here. And, I think that loneliness is kind of a negative word. And the reality is that, the world has changed very, very much. And, at one time you really couldn't be single. Now you can be single. At one time, a family of 6 shared one bathroom. Now everybody has to have their own bathroom. And, part of it is simply if people can do something, they will do it. And now people can be single, so they will be single. And that's just a little bit the reality of human nature, I think. One time I had a radio show and I had a plastic surgeon on the show, and I said to her, why are so many people getting plastic surgery? And she said, because they can. And that is, that's the answer to a lot of questions. Why are people doing this? Because they can.
Why do we need to build careers, ladies? Because we can. Your characters teach women to stand up for their desires and live on their own terms. What practical advice would you give modern women to boost their confidence and ambitions?
Well, what I do to boost my confidence is I try to, number one, practice, and number two, learn as much about, a subject or a topic as I can. And, New York City is a place where people go out a lot and they're very social. And you meet a lot of very important people. So one thing I always do is I always Google everybody and, see what they've written or what they're about, that sort of thing. So I would say it's about doing your research, doing a bit of research and practicing.
You often challenge social taboos by discussing female attractiveness, friendship, and career ambitions. What modern topics need such bold approaches?
Well, I think the topics that need bold approaches these days are it's really about men and women in society and, our roles and, the kinds of things that men do. I mean, for instance, one of the things that men always seem to do is they all seem to coalesce often around one guy who's not really a good guy. We've seen this happen again and again in history. And one of the things that women don't do is that they don't tend to coalesce around one woman. They tend to kind of tear her down. And I mean, that certainly has happened a lot in the United States. So I think it's really about women bonding together a little bit more, I think would make a big difference. And I always used to say, hey, women, you know what, just don't criticize other women. Because they're not really the ones that need to be criticized.
Yes, yesterday I've told ladies that I think that women hate other women, that we hate each other.
Yes.
You agree? Do you agree?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
It's not just me, ladies. It's not just me. So we don't just compete. We hate each other. We need to stop this hatred. We need to unite. Without this, we will not change the mindset of other people and of ourselves and the mind of men, of course. So, ladies, we need to keep bonds.
Yes.
25 years later, your characters are still relevant. Why do their stories continue to resonate with modern women, and why Samantha, Carrie, Miranda they're still alive? Because look, when you watch this, if you want to watch TV series again, you see that the quality of the video is pretty old.
Yes.
New York is pretty old. Maybe the clothes are already not so fashionable. Very nice, yeah, very stylish, but still. But the essence of Sex and the City, essence of their words are still the same. And
Yes.
if you move those heroines into the modern New York and ask them to tell the same things, it will be still relevant. It will be impossible to show it on the TV because we're too tolerant already nowadays. And the next episodes of the new generation of Sex and the City, let's call it like this, is a topic to discuss. We will not criticize it, but anyway. But new Sex and the City are not the same Sex and the City that was before. And their topics are not relevant. Your topics that was, and all those conversations and all those heroes that were in Sex and the City originally are still relevant. Why is that? Why new is not relevant and yours are relevant?
Yes. Well, that's something that I find so interesting. I think part of it is that women have changed. Men have not changed that much. And the question that really started Sex and the City and started the column was, why are there so many great women in New York and no great guys to marry them?
And we're not going to New York.
And I have to say, that is still a very relevant question. So dating, the structures of dating have changed. There's ghosting and all of that, and there are dating apps, which there weren't before. But we still have the same frustrations, and we still have the same questions. And one of the things that I remember was when I was very young, when I was 19, I was always trying to figure out how to survive while holding on to my agency as a person in the world. And, back then when I was 19, everybody said, oh, you really need men to survive. And I was always like, how do I keep my self-esteem and my dignity while figuring out how to hold on to being, an independent person in the world? And it was difficult back then. And I think that people, women still have that same question. Yes, we want to be in love and we want to give love. But we keep running up against some brick walls.
But I think you were brave and bold enough to ask those questions.
Yes.
Now, movie directors, they put aside their boldness and braveness, and they don't ask any bold questions. No bold questions anymore. Just some pictures. Where is that? Where is boldness of modern directors?
Where's boldness of modern directors?
Of course, I'm mentioning...
Do you mean movie directors?
Movie directors of next generation of Sex and the City. It's not bold. It's not bold at all. It's not relevant.
Well, I think that for boldness, a lot of people go to social media. And... the reality is, whether we like it or not, social media it's huge. I even find myself on too much TikTok. But it's also about safety and people having to make money. And I think that they're a little bit more afraid. But on the other hand, there are so many more female directors than there used to be. I mean, it used to be 4% of directors were women, and now it's much bigger percentage. So, but again, I think it's about, wanting to be safe and not wanting to take chances. Because if you take chances, you may turn off the audience. And entertainment is really very much about making money these days. So.
Thank you. It was a provocative question. How do you feel about your name being forever linked to Carrie Bradshaw? Did you ever wish to separate yourself from that character?
Actually, no. First of all, I love the character of Carrie Bradshaw. I love Sarah Jessica Parker. She's fantastic, and I admire her so much. But I have such a strong sense of self that I never really think about it or worry about it. Like, I know I'm Candace Bushnell, and Carrie Bradshaw is a character that I created, honestly, because my parents called me. My mother called and said, "Oh, by the way, we got a subscription to the New York Observer." And I had just gone to a sex club. And I was like, oh my God. And my parents were very conservative. So I was like, I have to do something. And then I thought, I will create an alter ego. And I remember I was writing Sex and the City. It was probably the third column. And my mother just called, and I was looking out on a brick wall, as one does in Manhattan. And this name just came to me, Carrie Bradshaw. And so that was really how Carrie Bradshaw was born. But people tell me to lean into it. Like, I never would have said like the OG Carrie Bradshaw, but I've had people who are, my Instagram managers or whatever, and they're like, call yourself the OG Carrie Bradshaw because that's what you are. So people tell me to lean into it. So I do. I take their advice.
Do you like Manolo Blahnik shoes?
I do, and I do have a lot of pairs of Manolo Blahniks, and people always ask, how many pairs of shoes do you have? And my answer is, I don't know, more than 20, but less than Imelda Marcos. And these are actually not Manolos, they're Sachin and Bobby. So.
You look gorgeous, by the way. Just gorgeous, so stylish, so amazing. Ladies, right?
Oh, thank you.
Very glamorous, very glamorous. So I think you easily can be, you are the perfect Carrie Bradshaw, the perfection. Carrie Bradshaw 2.0 perfection.
Oh, thank you.
When the book was adapted for television, did you expect the series to become a global cultural phenomenon, influencing fashion and language for entire generation and maybe several generations?
No, I did not. And I didn't really even know that it was big and it was getting bigger until after the second season, and people started telling me, oh, this is really like a big deal. And, everybody's watching it. I mean, honestly, when it first came out probably when I sold the book in 1996, I didn't even own a TV because TV in New York was a little bit non-existent. It was a little bit before cable, and the reception was really bad, and nobody stayed at home and watched TV. Everybody went out, they went to restaurants, they interacted with each other, and people felt like going out in New York was like a TV show. So, I mean, honestly, I didn't pay that much attention. I was actually, very busy living my life. And then people were telling me like, oh, it's a big deal. And then they said, oh, you should have asked for more money.
Yeah.
Who knew?
They owe you everything. Because it is a big deal. It is a huge deal. What is the most valuable life lesson you've learned from the success of Sex and the City?
Probably the most important lesson that I've learned is that you can't rest on your laurels, that it's really about the process and loving the process. And I've written, probably, I've written 11 or 12 books after Sex and the City. It was my first book. I kind of wish that in some ways it wasn't really my first book, because I think that my other books are actually better than Sex and the City. But that's the book that everybody knows. And I think it's about, you've got to keep trying and, keep pursuing your passions. You can't really rest on your laurels. So, I've had other TV shows, Lipstick Jungle, which is one of my favorite TV shows, which I think was fantastic, and the Carrie Diaries. And I hopefully have just sold another one of my books to be a TV series, 1/5 Avenue. So, so I keep working.
Thank you. If you could give one piece of advice to young Candace just arriving in New York, what would it be?
People always ask me this question, and I always answer the same way. Get the money. And I know that sounds a little bit kind of simple and maybe a little bit crude, but when I first came to New York, I didn't even think about money. I had no money. Nobody had any money. And, who knew money would become so important? It was all about character. But now when I look back, I'm like, I wish I'd had just a little bit more confidence and, to go after things.
If you were creating a new character to resonate with today's world, what would she be like, this lady?
Well, she would definitely be on social media, probably an influencer. And, I just find like young women today are they're accomplished and they're bold in a way that, women of my generation weren't, because we were really told back then that, you really needed to find a guy. And so I admire young women so much who they have careers and they go for it. And, they're not afraid to be by themselves, really. And, to have lots of friends, etc. So I would say it would be, a character like that who's probably unapologetic.
Thank you. What does female success mean today? Who, in your opinion, is a successful woman?
Well, I think being successful is about, first of all, it's about having a purpose. in life. And somebody who I think is really successful is, well, first of all, Anna Wintour, who was here yesterday, but also Martha Stewart. And I saw a documentary about Martha Stewart, and the thing that struck me the most was, she basically was sent to jail because she was the first woman billionaire. But even when she was in jail, she was like, I have to teach these other women to do something. And so she taught them crafts. And when she came out of jail, she was wearing a poncho that one of the women had crocheted. And I was so struck by that, because it was like, no matter where she was, she still found a way to fulfill her passion. And the other thing is, it's very difficult to have a long career. Being in your 20s, 30s, 40s, maybe 50s, and being successful is a little bit of a given, but to keep going and to keep being successful, it's quite hard. So those are the women I really respect, are the ones that they just keep going.
Candace, thank you so much. Girls, we need to keep going. We need to keep going.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Totally. Stand up. We need to watch Candace with massive applauses. More.